Hello, and welcome to The King of Creepy. This is a new channel for all things scary and macabre. We will be doing horror narrations and more, and we hope you'll join us on the ride. Please be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you enjoy this channel, and let's hop right into 5 scary supernatural stories I found around the internet. I was camping with my husband and his family at a small, remote lake in New Mexico. There were about 10 people in our group, and another group of 6 people in the next campsite. It was nighttime, and both groups were doing typical activities, making s'mores, having a few drinks, and telling stories, when we all heard what sounded like a little girl yelling out for help. Neither group had children with them, but we were all positive we were hearing a little girl and decided to search the area we heard the noises from together. There was a field behind our campsites, and we all saw a very tall, pure white figure standing maybe 100 feet away from us in the field, making noises. We all agreed this thing looked maybe 6 feet tall, skinny, and white as can be. We made our way closer to investigate, but whatever it was that we saw started backing off as soon as we got closer, and it disappeared into the trees. All night we continued to hear a little girl calling for help as we tried to sleep. I've never lived in a haunted house, but my mother did as a teen. Other houses on her street had strange things going on too. A few homes away from her lived a man and his family. One night, one of his daughters went to bed with a bad headache. The next day, she was dead. She'd passed away from an aneurysm. After the funeral, the family went away to get their minds off the tragedy, and the father asked my uncle, my mom's brother, to check on their pets. My mom and dad, they were dating then, went with my uncle. My mother had heard there was a grand piano and she wanted to play it, and my dad was studying to be a veterinarian. After entering the house, my uncle and my father headed to the basement to see the animals, and my mother went to the piano on the ground floor. She was playing it when she felt something brush her ankles. She thought a cat must have left the basement and walked past her. She kept playing and she felt it again. She looked under the piano and saw nothing. When she started again, she felt hands clasp her legs and grab them tightly. She dashed to the basement door, called my uncle and father, and waited for them. When they all walked outside, my uncle could tell my mom was rattled and asked what was wrong. She told him what had happened and he turned white. He told her that the daughter who died used to play a game with her father. When he'd play the piano, she'd crawl underneath, grab his ankles, and push his feet up and down on the pedals. My parents have a china cabinet that has lighting fixtures inside, so, if you wanted, the dishware inside could be illuminated. Despite never being used, the cord always remains plugged into an electric socket. Growing up, I was always told stories about how, after the death of one of my grandmothers, the lights would turn on every so often and roses could be smelt in the room the cabinet was in. One of my grandmother's favorite scents, I believe. I was too young to remember any of this. Last year, I was walking through my town's cemetery. I walked this route quite regularly to avoid a busy road. I was in the oldest section of the cemetery where people had been buried 200 or 300 years ago. For a while I walked slowly, figuring out how old each person was when they died and reading the last names to see if I recognized any. After returning home that evening, the china cabinet lights were on. By that point in time, no one knew I had walked through the cemetery, nor was there a power outage, earthquake, or some other occurrence that could possibly explain these lights being on. The lights hadn't been turned on in years, and This was now the second house and third electric socket the cabinet had been plugged into. I think the time I spent at the graves that day might have caused something to follow me home. I stopped going through the cemetery as much and, if I did, avoided doing what I did that day. It hasn't happened since. In the weeks that followed, my mom and I smelled roses, despite not having any in the house, nor anyone using a rose-scented fragrance. My husband and I moved into a new house last year. COVID did us real dirty, and various less than ideal scenarios meant our savings took a huge hit. So we made the decision to move outside of the city. Cheaper rent, bigger space, a garden for the first time, all the good stuff. Since we moved in, there has always been a weird feeling, and I believe that, looking back, I have experienced a few odd things already that I have overlooked and tried to rationalize away. The only one that I can't deny, though, happened earlier this week. I am still work from home whilst my husband is back in the office, so I am at home most of the day on my own. I've gotten used to this routine over time, and honestly, I'm pretty happy with working at home, in the peace and quiet. It allows me to get other things done around the house during my breaks, and cutting out that commute has been a godsend, especially now that we are outside of the city. Anyway, because of this new routine, I've gotten used to having a new sixth sense around timings of the day and when I can expect my husband home, usually around 7:30 p.m. The night this happened, I clocked off work early and decided to take a shower since it was hair wash day. Thick hair friends know how much prep this takes. My husband often comes home when I'm showering and usually announces himself so as not to scare me. For a bit of context, our house is a super old English terraced house, which means it's long, thin, and tall. When we moved in, the landlord had just renovated the bathroom, that's located right at the top of the stairs, by adding a new freestanding shower suite. Basically, if you are standing in the shower with the door open, you can look right down the stairs and down the hallway with a clear view of the front door. When home alone, I often shower with the door open to mitigate the scare I will inevitably get when my husband comes home and bumbles up the stairs. When my husband gets home, he always announces himself as he comes through the front door, usually something along the lines of, "I'm home," or "It's just me." From the bathroom, the angle of the stairs means that I can only see up to the knees of whoever is standing directly at the front door. My husband knows this and always bends down ever so slightly to wave his hand up the stairs if he hears the shower. So while I am standing in the shower listening to the rattle of keys in the front door, I became consciously aware that it was much too early for my husband to be home yet, since I had clocked off work early, and it was still only about 4:30 p.m. While I am freaking out and staring wide-eyed down the stairs, my husband comes through the door. I see his feet with his familiar gray suit and dress shoes. He announces himself in his distinctive deep voice, "It's just me," and bends down to wave. I see his hand angled up at me and a quick flash of the top of his blonde head. Relief. He must be home early today. Only he wasn't home early. After I relaxed, I looked away to finish shampooing, and about a minute later was when I noticed that I never heard the front door close. I never heard the sound of his heavy feet on the wooden floor or the loud thud of him dropping his work backpack to the floor before going into the kitchen. I peeked back down the stairs and everything was as I left it before showering. No bag, no work shoes strewn in the archway. Everything was normal, except that my husband hadn't come home as I had seen him do. Naturally, I freaked. Even though I checked the door and it was locked internally, I still went through the whole house with a kitchen knife just in case, but nothing was out of place. I sat on the sofa in silence for about 2 hours before my husband finally arrived home and went through his nightly routine. The very routine that I had already seen him do once that evening. I never told him about this and the other goings-on that I've remembered with the gift of hindsight. I know he wouldn't believe me. He's as skeptical as they come, and I don't want him to freak out thinking that I'm suddenly seeing things. Used to have a delivery route, third shift. Part of my route had me passing through a national forest. The first few weeks going through this forest had the hairs on my arms standing up. It was in this first week that one day I stopped to get gas at the town just before going into the forest. I never walked away from the car, used my card at the pump, blah blah blah. But as soon as I get to the forest, I feel like something is in my car with me, in the back seat. I didn't see anything through the rear view and I was petrified of turning around, but I knew what it looked like all the same. To sum it up, an older lady with a face similar to a scream mask with long, stringy gray hair. After a few weeks, I come to peace with whatever the fuck is guarding the forest. Basically told it that I respect the forest, I'm not here to tear things up, litter, whatever. Months later, I'm being sent off to other areas to fill in. I'm friends with the guy that took over my route, and one night we're both talking before the routes were set out to load up, and I asked him if anything had ever joined him on the route. He knew exactly what I was talking about. Knew it was in the national forest, something in the back seat, only his was some jackal-headed creature, not an old lady. Later, I asked someone else that used to have the route if they had seen strange things, again, in the forest. And it got to be amusing, since if I filled in on that route or anything, I never had problems anymore on that stretch. I used to see other weird things out there, though. Mostly weird lights. One night, I thought there was a police car somewhere until I realized the forest was too dense in this area for a car to be in there. There were weird flashing blue lights though. There's camping areas out there, but not on that main road. I usually don't discuss this much because people try to explain things away. But they weren't there. I saw what I saw.